Good morning. My name is Esther Manheimer. I'm the mayor of the city of Asheville, and I'd like to welcome you to the September 7th agenda briefing work session for the Asheville City Council. All council members and staff are participating virtually. The live meeting will be streamed on the city's YouTube channel, accessed through the YouTube icon on the front page of the city's website, or via the live stream. The live meeting will be available on Charter Spectrum channel 193. You may listen to the meeting via phone at 855-925-2801, meeting code 8410. And as with all work sessions and agenda reviews, we don't take any public comment during this meeting. Council and staff, please unmute yourselves and say a quick hello when I call your name. Vice Mayor Sandra Kilgore.
Hello.
Councilwoman Sage Turner.
Hello.
Councilwoman Shanika Smith.
Hello.
Councilwoman Antoinette Mosley.
Good morning.
Councilwoman Kim Roney.
Good morning.
Councilwoman Maggie Ullman.
Hello, everybody.
And our city manager, Deborah Campbell.
Good morning.
Assistant City Manager, Rachel Wood.
Good morning.
Assistant City Manager, Ben Woody.
Good morning.
City Attorney, Brad Branham.
Good morning, everyone.
And City Clerk, Maggie Burleson.
Good morning.
Okay, I'm going to now turn it over to our City Manager, Deborah Campbell.
Thank you, Mayor. And again, good morning, everyone. We will be providing you with an overview of the upcoming work session agenda, business meeting agenda for Tuesday, September the 12th. And Ben Woody is going to provide that overview, but I think there will be a tag team between Rachel, Ben, and Brandon, our city attorney, on one of the items. And with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Woody to forward the agenda.
Thank you, Ms. Campbell. And again, good morning, Mayor and Council. I am going to start with our council agenda. First, under proclamations, we have September 12th, 2023 as Manna Food Bank Day. Moving into the consent agenda, and I'm just going to cover two items today on the consent. Actually, I'm going to do one and ask Brad to do the other. But if there are other items you want to discuss, please let me know. So first, I wanted to identify consent item D. This is a long-standing agreement that actually dates back to 2013. And I think it's a very positive thing. This is an automatic aid agreement between the city of Asheville and the Reems Creek Fire Department. And what this does, it strengthens the standard of response and coverage for our fire service in the Beaver Dam Valley area. So again, great example of kind of interagency cooperation to provide a higher level of service. And then I'm going to move down to item G, and I'm going to ask Brad to take a second here to explain that.
Thank you, Ben. Good morning, everyone, yet again. So item G is something that I do want council members to become familiar with, because you are going to begin seeing this on a monthly basis going forward on your agendas. This is something that has historically been handled entirely by Buncombe County. We have a longstanding agreement where the county handles all of the tax collection for the city. And as part of that process, they have also on a monthly basis approved any requests for refunds or releases. However, a recent interpretation of the statute, which requires the governing board of a taxing authority to approve these things, has led us to believe that it is a good practice for the city going forward to do exactly what the county is already doing, which is for ourselves and our own tax collection purposes, approve on a monthly basis per statute all of the requested releases and refunds. This process will still be managed by the county going forward. So what you're doing is taking a procedural step to comply with the statute, which does require the governing board to take this action on a monthly basis. All of the actual work will be done by the county, which we will continue to coordinate on. So they will be providing us the information. They will be approving this as well on their end and asking you to provide that cursory approval on a monthly basis. So you'll see this at once a month meetings going forward. Any questions about this item? All right. Thank you, Ben.
Could someone please give us more information about item B?
Yes, I would be happy to do that. Thank you for the question. Item B is our contract that we have with the service provider to provide after hours phone answering for the water department. So that would be if you had an issue, a water main break or a service disruption, you would call this number, that phone service would then contact the appropriate on-call staff to address that issue. So it basically gives us 24/7 coverage of our water department.
Okay, so it's just water. Thank you.
Just water, yes. Our customer service center. So yes.
We might want to edit the agenda to say that it's water. I mean, on the agenda itself, I know you could click on that. Oh, Maggie, oh, great. Okay, thumbs up.
Councilwoman.
Yeah.
You had a question about item F. That corner is currently a landing spot where you have folks coming from the Emma community, Chicken Hill, the River Arts District from the New Belgium side, and the Westgate exit from West Asheville. And I know that we don't have a sidewalk there right now, but in the absence of a sidewalk, that corner is used as a pretty significant landing spot. You can tell from all the grass is pressed down by feet and other devices. So I'm curious, when we have multimodal projects close by, it's a access to the closest grocery store for the River Arts District, though it's a little tricky that way. Also transit stops and to and from our River Arts District Greenway system. What is the future plan for sidewalks instead of what's being used essentially in the right of way there?
We can get that information for you included in follow-up materials.
Great, thank you.
Okay, any other items on the consent that any council members would like to cover or have a question about? Okay. I'm going to keep moving then. Next, we have presentations and reports. And under that, first item is the Pack Square visioning concept plan. And I just want to take a second or a few minutes here to walk through that. And one thing to note about this particular process is on your next meeting, your September 12th meeting, you'll have a presentation on this planning effort, but we're not asking the council to take any kind of action at that meeting. So this is simply just a presentation, and Mitchell Silver, who's the lead consultant, will be providing that presentation at your next meeting. And then we're going to bring it back to the September 26th meeting to have the public hearing and any kind of action from council. So just want to clarify those 2 points in the process for this particular item. The Pack Square visioning concept planning process began with the work of the Joint City County Advanced Monument Task Force. And in March 2021, City Council adopted a resolution to remove the Advanced Monument. Following that, the City Council and Buncombe County Commissioners contributed funding for a planning process to develop a vision for this site, for this portion of the city and the county. On June 2022, City Council authorized a contract with McAdams Company to lead the engagement process and begin to develop this planning effort for that portion of Pack Square Park. The project kicked off in late summer 2022, included significant public engagement, was led by our Planning and Urban Design Department, and is now complete and is coming to this council for consideration. Just to take us a few minutes to talk about the plan itself. Overall, the vision in the plan states that the Pack Square Plaza in the future should do a couple of things. One, that area should be more usable and accessible, provide new experiences and amenities, be a place for sharing stories and addressing past harms, and better connect Pack Square to the block. The plan also recommends strategies to reuse the former Vance Monument site, how to design and include new programming to make Pack Square Plaza more welcoming and inclusive. It considers a number of public-private partnerships in the future around that space. And then, as I mentioned, really how to connect the block and Pack Square Plaza and make those more cohesive and connected in general. And then finally, the plan does anticipate some of the potential costs and phasing of these types of improvements in the Pack Square Plaza area. The general framework of the plan, you'll see this in staff, and Mitchell Silver will obviously go into more detail on this, but it really creates the community input and kind of frames that into 10 themes. So there's 10 themes of the engagement. And then as a response, it establishes 10 design-based ideas to kind of help guide any future improvement projects that are associated with the engagement process. Planning and Economic Development Council Committee those members have seen this a couple times. They've discussed this, and at their August 14th meeting, they voted unanimously to recommend to City Council. And that's where we really developed the schedule of having the presentation of the plan on September 12th, and then consideration of adoption on September 26th. Downtown Commission has also heard updates on this plan, and they voted unanimously to recommend adoption of the plan to council. And finally, this will go to our Planning and Zoning Commission on September 14th. So I don't have that action from the Planning and Zoning Commission yet, but we'll have that in place prior to any council consideration for adoption. Any questions on Pack Square Visioning Plan? Great. Our next item under presentations and reports is the manager's report. And this is really kind of an update on some organizational initiatives. We'll have a recognition as part of that. And we'll also just have some status updates on key projects. Public hearings, moving on. Item A is what's called as project, or known as Project Aspire, Project Aspire. And this is the property at 1 Oak Street. And I'm going to have staff display a map again for this. And here it comes. I did go over this in pretty significant detail at our last council agenda briefing. And I'm not going to go into as much detail, but I am going to take a second just to kind of refresh council on this particular conditional zoning request. Overall, I'm sorry, go ahead, Deborah.
I was wondering, Councilmember Tony, did you have your hand raised?
I did, but I can wait until the presentation part in case it answers it.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Councilwoman Turner, if I missed your hand. Okay, I'm sorry about that. So on this particular rezoning request, again, you can see the kind of the sketch plan or the conceptual plan for what this looks like. And again, it centers around the First Baptist Church on Woodfin Street. Phase 1 of the project, which is on the right of the image, is proposing between 100 and 200 residential units, commercial space between 6,000 and 14,000 square feet. It does include a hotel with between 165 and 300 guest rooms. And finally, community and recreational space between 60 and 75,000. And that is intended to be utilized by our YMCA, which currently sits at the location of phase 2 of this project. Phase 2 of the project is, again, between 300 and 450 residential units. Does include office space proposed between 125 and 225,000 square feet. And finally, phase 2 is intended to include 30,000 to 90,000 square feet of commercial space. So we have an overall total of 1.1 million square feet. And they're also proposing 2 parking structures to support this development. The 2 towers and the 2 larger buildings, the one in phase 1 is about 20 stories tall, or is 20 stories tall, excuse me. And the building in phase 2 is 19 stories tall. So that's kind of the overview. As I mentioned at the last agenda briefing, this is the provided there's no changes proposed as part of this conditional zoning. If council approves this, future approvals will be handled by the staff and by our appointed design review committee. So again, this would be the first and last time that you would see this project at the council level, provided one that you approve it if you do, and provided too, they don't make changes to it.
It would be the first and only time we'll see it from an entitlement standpoint. I assume we might see it again if they have requests regarding housing support.
Yeah, that's a good point. If there are any, any incentives or any changes to the conceptual plan, there are, or any partnership proposals, any of those would come back to council potential. But yes, from a purely zoning entitlement perspective, this would be the opportunity. And I feel like Brad's going to add something to my response. So Brad.
Thank you, Ben. I tried to tack this on perfectly as you've given me the good segue there. So just as a reminder, council, this is a little bit out of the ordinary in that you are not seeing the proposed rezoning request at the same time or even after you have seen any requests for subsidies or other similar requests from the developer themselves. So it is very important just to give you a quick reminder that your decision on this particular item on the agenda will be purely the zoning question, which means you must limit your decision-making process to two things. Number one, whether or not the rezoning request is consistent with the approved area plans. And number two, is the request reasonable? And there are various factors which we can talk about more in detail, but generally speaking, the most important aspect I want you to remember is we're not taking into consideration any future request for entitlement or the financing portion of this particular development, only the development land entitlement itself and whether or not that is consistent and whether or not it is reasonable for this particular location. So please let me know if we need to go over any more details about that in advance, but given the complexity of potential future asks, I wanted to remind council of that dynamic.
Thank you, Brad. I have just a few questions. They're probably best for like a follow-up memo or something. So I was trying to remember when we did the first micro unit over by, I guess on Hilliard, it was the first time we saw the Luigi ask and a conditional zoning ask at the same time. And the conversation was a little messy because what I understood was we always had to have a Luigi ask before the CZ ask. And I think we changed that rule. And I thought we brought it to concurrent, but could someone verify that? I really couldn't find the documents to confirm. And I'm just not sure, because I understand there will be a Luigi, and I understand what you're saying. This is just the entitlement. But don't we have a process that makes the Luigi happen simultaneously? If you could just confirm. And then I think, well, one is I'd love to hear if there has been some input. I know the last delay was due to wanting to have input from the East End community directly. That's what I saw in my emails. I don't know if anybody has a follow-up to that or if they've submitted any follow-up, but that would be helpful. And then a couple things, since we are entitling it, there are some conditions that need to be layered in, and some of them do relate to housing or at least affordable portions or something, right? Didn't they say they're going to provide X units and something at affordable units? And if that's the case, I'm just wondering if there is a time to add some other conditions that I had in discussions with them, which of course would need to be verified and checked with them ahead of our hearing. So those would be, one of them is around gating. So last time we had a project this large, it was that Cox and Ashland with 550 units or something and 100,000 square feet of retail. And they were, they went through design and ended up like fencing off half of it, and it wasn't all ADA accessible. And I was talking with the development team about this, and they're more than amenable. This is a very public, all streets will be public kind of thing. But I did want to make sure that condition was in there since this project is going to be transforming over the years to come. And they know that as well. The other thing that I had talked to them about, and I'm not sure where this landed, was the idea that since their first phase has a hotel request, I was a little concerned that they weren't going through the typical hotel process, because I think, after 115 rooms, it has to come to council. But up to 115 rooms, we have these like basic things, this community benefits table, these activation of retail, these rules that we made. And in my impression, when you go bigger than those, you still have to meet those basic rules. So I'm not sure if they have submitted anything around a community benefits table. If they have, could we get that? And, if all those things that we normally look at. And then lastly, one of the other conditions with
Stage, I don't think you're right on the assumption that if it goes over that size, that they have to meet the community benefits table. It just has to be reviewed by council.
Right. I just said that when I think of it, I think of it as a greater.
Oh, absolutely. I don't disagree with you. I just want to make sure it's clear that
It's not
Yeah.
a requirement. We didn't actually say if you go over this, you have to meet all these things. But that's kind of how I always viewed it, that these were for these medium-sized hotels. You could just move through if you met all these conditions or chose from these lists of opportunities. And so when you're bigger, it seems to me that you would still do those. But I'm just not sure if they have, if we ever scored this in our rubric or anything. And I would love that information. And then the last one was, and if we're going to have conditions around affordability, they did agree to accept vouchers. And I didn't know if that we could get that into the conditions. I know some of that is related to potential future asks on policy and incentives, but if this is our opportunity for conditions on entitlement, that's where it would need to be. And then if anybody has an East End update, I would appreciate hearing it.
I do have East End update. The developers met with the East End Neighborhood Association about a week ago. The meeting I attended, the meeting lasted 2.5, close to 3 hours. My understanding is that since that meeting, a committee was picked by the association to continue conversations with the developer. My understanding is those conversations have continued. And I suspect a representative from the Easton Valley Neighborhood Association will be in attendance at our meeting Tuesday. I know that one of their asks was that they be included in the process should it be approved Tuesday throughout the design process and various other asks from the neighborhood.
Thank you, Antoinette.
Councilman Turner, real quickly, there's a lot of hands raised. I do want to address one question directly that you asked that I think is important. I should have covered this. In terms of affordable housing, they do have a condition that relates to that. And what it says is that, and this is for each phase, a minimum of 20% of the residential units provided will be designated affordable to those earning at or below 80% of the AMI for 20 years. So they are committing to a 20% affordability ratio at 80% AMI.
Yeah, and that's great.
That is the condition.
I think though, so what I understood about process, and Brad, correct me if I'm wrong, is these conditional zoning requests, for everybody's sake, we can't like negotiate at the dais. We need to agree on terms ahead of time, and both parties have to be in agreement with those terms. That's kind of how I've understood it legally. And so I did meet with them, and these did come up. And my understanding is they do want them as conditions. So my point here is to make sure that we do the reconnaissance between Tuesday to confirm with them and get things on paper. That's really all and then of course more information that I requested, but that's really the point for me.
Great, and I guess I'll try to Councilman Roney, I think you had your hand up after Councilman Turner.
So I did speak with the developer this morning, heard good things from the neighborhood engagement. Following up from our last agenda briefing, the questions about public right-of-way and the roads maintaining public status, which would provide potentially more flexibility in the future. I heard that the project developer was amenable to that conversation, so I'd love to know if staff has also had that conversation. I also hear concerns about it being separated from downtown instead of integrated into downtown and being part of downtown and people being able to move through it. It is not my understanding that the intention is to put a gate up, but I think that if we had some clarity around if the roads are going to be publicly owned and maintained, that would help for the conversation on Tuesday. Another thing that I had heard from the neighborhood, which I thought was a really interesting idea, if there was a future potential to transfer ownership of space, whether it's commercial or residential, whether it's land trust or parking spaces or parking lot ownership, that could happen between the city and the county. But have we ever had a situation where we've done something like that with a commercial going to like a neighborhood or a nonprofit? Could it be potentially a commercial real estate
I mean,
I
that's
hope
like a loft, right? A loft was with another entity. So yeah, but not a neighborhood to your point
So if the
specifically.
neighborhood had a nonprofit entity or an umbrella, like a land trust situation, I don't know, it's something to explore. And if neighbors are going to come forward with that question on Tuesday, I would love to be prepared to answer on whether or not that could be part of conditional use.
Can you say a little more about that, Kim? To kind of
Yeah, this I guess it's kind of like a menu of ideas. Normally, when I hear a lot of feedback around a conditional zoning, people are concerned about, will there be a place for people to live and work in those spaces? And it comes around affordability. If this project, what I seem to be hearing the most about is it possible for the community to have ownership in the space? So you've got like the YW nonprofit, you've got the churches there, or the YMCA nonprofit, sorry. And then what would it look like if there was either commercial space or residential units or the parking decks? If there's going to be a transfer of ownership as part of a conditional use, could it be the neighborhood or a nonprofit and not just the city? For example, if there was going to be a transfer of the parking lot to the city or the county for future maintenance or partnership, could it instead be owned by a neighborhood or nonprofit group?
That's part of the very discussion that the parties were having last week and continue to happen now. I understand there have been discussion, and I don't know where this will lead, with discussion about transferring part to the community land trust, also including part of the commercial space, and whether the neighborhoods would be able to set up a separate nonprofit entity that would focus extensively on the commercial spaces. So that's part of the discussion. I don't know where they landed, or I'd give you more info, but I don't know where they landed.
so
I just want to make sure that we're ready to answer those questions and that
right.
there's, if
That's
it can be
helpful.
conditional zoning.
The only thing I would say, I mean, I would assume it would actually have to be a lease agreement rather than ownership, because there's going to be debt on this whole project. I don't see how you're going to have banks that have debt, whether, so what'd you say?
It is all condoed. I mean, it's not impossible from that land use and property ownership regard, but I don't know if it's possible to do it nonprofit, but I think what we're getting at here is also some brewing things around why Brad spoke up about process, like entitlement versus future potential partnership deals, because it's my understanding that there is going to be a request for partnership on the parking structures, plural, and how that gets financed and stuff, and whether it's feasible is pretty relative to what this project gets built or not. But we're not really able to speak to that yet. We can't really until it comes to us, because this is just like, can we build it? I mean, really, we're asking what conditions can even exist? Can we put a condition like that? I think is what Kim's request is.
Well,
Yeah, I
while
would love
the
to know any
bill is
policy.
out of, I'm Brad, do you have enough information from us to try to formulate a response to that? I see the smoke billowing out of your ears, so I'm just trying to make sure you.
I am highly intrigued. I might need a little more specificity about what the exact plan. What I'm hearing is, I think potentially, as Councilmember Turner has said, a permissible thing to do. The question becomes, what are you as a council able to include in your thought process and conditions process? The one limitation I would just remind everybody about is there is a very clear in North Carolina prohibition against zoning around ownership. So I know that sounds very broad, but just as a quick example, you are to treat a rental apartment the same as a condo. So you could not say we would have an allowance for someone to have a condo, but we don't want someone renting an apartment in this situation. From a land perspective, land use perspective, it is a residential unit. It is the same either way. So when you're beginning to delve into the waters about who is going to be the specific user, what the specific activity is, or who the quote unquote owner would be, you run into much more risky ground in terms of crossing over potentially where your allowances as a legislative body. But with a little more specificity, I'll be happy to render a more particular opinion on that.
I wonder if we be able to have a condition be that the developer create a community benefit agreement and go through a community benefit agreement negotiation process? Because my guess is there's just a lot of technical stuff that would need to be figured out with any of these examples that the neighborhood is suggesting. And this is going to be a very long-term process. And so if we could do a CBA, we could look at it in the sense that it's not that our condition has a precise project or concept, but that it is a commitment to be in an ongoing negotiation through the duration of this process. Because I just feel like any of these ideas take a lot of work to find out if they could happen and they could fall through. But ultimately, I would love to see that this developer in the long term of this massive project is held accountable to being in a negotiation relationship with the community.
To your question, Councilmember Allman, and thank you for that. North Carolina is a little bit different than some other states where even in South Carolina, there is a very clear allowance for these, what we call generally community benefits agreements. In North Carolina, it is specifically disallowed, which means we have a very, very high level of restriction on a local government's ability to impose community benefit agreements. Now, what we do have currently with hotels is we have, separate from the approval process, we have an incentive-based program that allows for a streamlined review process, not an approval process, a review process, if you're willing to meet certain community benefits. The reason that we structured it this way is because, generally speaking, those benefits would not be something that we would have the legal authority to include as a condition of a rezoning. But we have said if you are willing to voluntarily offer some of these things, then we will in turn allow you a streamlined review process. This particular entity has gone all the way through the full review process, which means we would be limited probably completely from enforcing any kind of the items that are typical community benefits for our hotel process on them as a condition of rezoning. Now, there may be certain conditions that we could discuss as viable, but the vast majority of those are going to be probably purely voluntary on the developer's behalf.
This is why I requested that the hotel kind of rubric and puzzle that we've laid out for smaller hotels be utilized here. And because it's really our only opportunity. And I hear you, Brad, it has to be voluntary. Both parties have to agree. But I think, the point of bringing it up is to signal this is what we were looking for. This is what I'd like to see. I'd like to see it treated as a level higher than the smaller hotels because it is a larger hotel. And to me, those just going through that application stage of what a smaller hotel would do is, to me, imperative to this process to have such a large hotel, especially. But Councilwoman Ullman, that's kind of the closest we can get to it, unfortunately. And Brad, you did remind me, though, one of the conditions they did say is in the drawings, but maybe isn't just immediately obvious because we just have these massing documents. They are agreeing to activate the ground floor of the hotel component. And they say that it's actually designed that way, but that condition should be in there, which is one of the things in this more typical hotel review process.
I think that's absolutely something that could be included and considered as part of the land use of this particular site.
I meant to mention that one. And lastly, I want to say, because I know I'm kind of like harping on this project a little bit right now, but this is a fabulous project. There are so many community benefits from this project as is, and the nature of the partnership with the Y and stuff. But for the community's sake, like this is a really big thing. It's going to happen over a decade plus. And I do think it's probably likely to come back to council in some way or form because it will need some amount of variances that P&Z can't allow or something will happen. I won't be surprised. But I just really want us to make sure we're getting it right on the front end and for the community to understand, like, this is really going to take a long time. And just because if we entitle it, it may not actually go through. Like, they still have to build the whole project. And I just want to make sure that's clear for everybody listening, since it's such a big piece of the community in downtown.
I had another thing. There's a handful of things around their transportation plan that I think I've asked them to kind of take a look at and I think could be improved. And so I guess a question on process is, as Sage, you were mentioning earlier, you have some conditions that you're curious about and interested in seeing, but maybe the time to work through those is not on the dais. So what kind of, like, I don't know, are we ready for this on Tuesday? Are they ready for this? Have they heard all of our conditions and our ideas? Like, in our agenda briefing, I don't really, we don't have all the detailed agenda paperwork through yet. So I'm kind of wanting to see what that's going to look like. So I guess I'm asking kind of a question of, when will we see kind of what they've responded to from the various conversations all of us have had? And
we have a strong tradition of making sausage on the dais, but I know that gives Brad a heart attack and doesn't necessarily produce the greatest outcome. So I don't know who is representing, because the entities here are the church and the Y, and then a developer that they've partnered with, Furman, out of South Carolina. So I know a lot of us are meeting with Furman, and the church and the Y have their own council. And so it's a little bit tricky to know exactly if I'm asking, and I assume that that the developer has some sort of representation. Maybe they're even watching this meeting, I hope. Deborah is nodding. So there could be a chance here for whoever is the planner on this one and Brad to collect all this information and talk with their council and see how close we can get to an exhibit A or whatever the conditions are that are attached to the conditional zoning, and then figure out what is remaining. And I think this is beyond our normal discussion around conditions, where there's a little easier to distill down and write out and attach to the zoning approval. But so I think, Brad, we're going to kind of lean on you a little heavy for some of these more out of the box ideas, for you to tell us what is and isn't workable that the neighborhood's looking for, and some creative solutions, understanding what the intent is.
Absolutely, Mayor. So I would invite
I
would invite any council member to reach out to me if you have specific questions about any particular ask. I'll be happy to answer those questions. We have already had discussions that I've been included in with the developer, so they are aware. They can certainly, and I know are in ongoing conversations about putting together the conditions list. At this point, it is pretty clear to me that is still somewhat in flux. So we'll be working on this as we approach the hearing before council, but we will make sure to include anything that we do have an agreement with by the developer that we feel is legally enforceable. But we would always invite the developer to voluntarily include some additional elements that perhaps we can't include as official conditions in the rezoning, but we invite them to do their very best to provide the best potential project for the community, regardless of some of the legal limitations.
And real quickly, Mayor, just to kind of build on Brad's comments a little bit, I can confirm that both the developer group and Will Palmquist are watching this council briefing, and we will obviously reach out to the developer, and we'll work to try to address as many questions and comments today as we can. Certainly the technical questions that council asked, I have no doubt that Will and the staff will be prepared to address those at the meeting. But we'll also, as Brad, kind of referred to, we'll reach out to the developer and try to make sure that everybody understands the topics that came up today and be prepared to address those on Tuesday.
And Ben, I'll email you some of the specifics of what I talked about when I chatted with them.
Yeah, that'll be great, because we're definitely going to have to watch this video a second time to capture everything. I have no doubt about that. So,
can I ask you one last thing to add to this follow-up? I'll be brief. So I want to make sure I heard you properly. So when we have these smaller hotels, the small and medium, they go through that rubric. And one of the things is you have to choose, I'll just be explicit, you have to choose between committing some funds to affordable housing fund or reparations. It's one of the things you have to choose. Now, are you saying that because we don't have that exact kind of process for this larger form of hotel, that they can still voluntarily put those things in, right? Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
It's not allowed. Okay.
Yeah, and so the allowance for those small and medium hotels is an option. It is not a requirement that they go through those community benefits. If they choose, they can do that in order to receive the benefit of the streamlined review process. With the larger hotels, that's a requirement that those come all the way through council, but there is nothing stopping them from providing voluntarily any of those benefits that they feel compelled to do so. But in either case, anything that comes through to council, we have restrictions on, generally speaking, including those as conditions of final approval. But in other words, in the incentive program, it's a condition of receiving the incentive, but a purely voluntary basis either way.
Thank you.
Okay, if there's no further discussion on public hearing item A, I will continue. Public hearing item B is being continued to the September 26th meeting. And so that then brings us to the unfinished business portion of our agenda. And under that, item A is the second and final reading of the changes to the solicitation ordinance that were discussed at the last council meeting. Go ahead, Brad.
Thank you for being. Just quickly, as a reminder, council, you have already taken the public comment on this at your previous meeting. This is, as I mentioned previously, just the required second vote for this type of item. But as a reminder, we generally do not take public comment once you've already received it at the previous meeting.
Thank you, Brad. And then, oops, I'm sorry, Councilwoman Roney.
But it doesn't mean that we couldn't take public comment. We just don't typically, correct?
That's correct. It is always in council's purview to decide how to handle public comment, the receipt of it or not. There is a requirement that you take public comment on all substantive votes. You've now fulfilled that requirement, but it's up to council how you'd like to handle this going forward.
Okay, and our last item under new business refers to short-term shelters, and I'm actually going to turn that over to Rachel to cover that today.
Thank you, Ben. And once again, good morning, Mayor and City Council. So this is a short-term shelter funding request stemming from the Homeless Initiative Advisory Committee's Shelter Work Group. And this group has worked over the past spring and summer to develop a strategy to add interim housing shelter beds in alignment with the National Alliance to End Homelessness recommendation to increase the inventory of interim housing beds. The recommendation from the National Alliance to End Homelessness was to increase that number by 95 beds. Through a request for partnerships process, HIAC vetted proposals from different agencies and is recommending the addition of 43 new shelter beds and the preservation of 45 existing shelter beds as an important step to achieve the recommendations from the National Alliance to End Homelessness. The cost of the 45 preserved beds, which would be preserved at the Salvation Army, their funding, federal CARES Act funding ends at the end of September, and the additional 43 new beds is a combined $1.75 million. The 43 new beds would come from Haywood Street Respite, Safe Shelter, and Salvation Army. And then again, those 45 preserved beds would be at the Salvation Army. The requested council action includes a resolution and associated budget amendment to approve funding half of this request at $875,000 using city ARPA funds. At the County Commission September 5th meeting, the County Commission approved funding the other half of this request using county ARPA dollars. Through an interlocal agreement, the city would serve as the primary contract administrator for the 3 contracts and also serve as the primary fiduciary managing both the city's and county's ARPA funds for 3 contracts with Haywood Street Respite, Safe Shelter, and the Salvation Army. If approved, the shelter beds would be available starting October 1st, and the funding would be for a period of 15 months to keep those shelter beds operational. That concludes, Councilmember Roney.
Thank you, Rachel. I have been following this conversation as the liaison to the HIAC, and I just have one curiosity, and that's, what are we putting in place in writing to ensure that services will be compliant with our non-discrimination ordinance?
I'll follow up with both Kim Marmon-Sachs, our ARPA contract administrator, as well as Emily Ball, and we can include that in our follow-up materials.
Thank you.
Councilmember Mosley.
My question is really more tangential in nature. Since these funds, should we approve, will be coming out of ARPA, and we're starting to receive requests from different organizations for remaining ARPA funds, I'm wondering what process will we have in place to determine how the remaining ARPA funds are distributed?
That's ultimately at the discretion of the city council. Deborah, I don't know if you want to respond.
Sure. Councilmember Mosley, we can do what we did similar to the original allocation of ARPA funds. It seems like that possibly would be an appropriate response if you all want to take it back out to the community. Otherwise, you can do what you're doing now with this ask from HIAC, which is on a case-by-case basis, you can consider them, or we can have a broad community process similar to what we had originally for the original allocation of ARPA funds.
So I have not been able to follow along with this process as much as some others, it sounds like. I think I have the basics down. I thought it was a higher number of beds at first, maybe 55 or something. But who among us, so Kim is the HIAC liaison. Esther, have you been involved in this too because you're part of that? Okay, so this is the big programming that we've been talking about. Okay.
Yeah, this is, the National Alliance to End Homelessness recommended that we identify 90 additional beds. And so the shelter subcommittee of HIAC went through a whole process where we toured pretty much every existing shelter facility in the city. We noted what their capacity includes. So we have some shelters that, due to underfunding, understaffing, are not able to utilize all of their bed space, and they have empty beds essentially. So instead of trying to, what we did is then we drafted an RFP that matched the description of what the National Alliance to End Homelessness said we needed. So of the 90 beds, they said specifically we needed 10 beds for families. We needed 25 beds that were kind of a higher, for folks that were going to need a higher level of services. And then we needed, doing the math, the balance of those beds, I thought it was 60 or 65, I can't remember. Just kind of your basic additional shelter beds. So we took all that, we drafted the RFP, we pushed it out, and we got many responses. And you can see kind of the biggest underutilized provider is the Salvation Army. They had 3 whole rooms of beds that they weren't able to utilize due to funding issues and staffing issues. We were lucky to get responses for the 10 family beds, so that's good news. So on the one hand, something to consider is the idea that this would not, instead of a code purple where you just have these additional beds available on nights below 32 degrees, these beds are going to start October 1 and be 365 days a year. They're going to add to the current stock of beds that are available all year long, which should reduce our code purple need this winter. Also, because our permanent supportive housing units are coming online here very soon, and that's about 200 units. So we're hoping that this will make a difference, but it is not a long-term solution. This is obviously very expensive just to bring online these additional shelter beds. So the HIAC will be creating a task force that I plan on serving on, along with a county commission representative, Jasmine Beachflower, who's also on this shelter subcommittee, to identify a more permanent solution to address the additional bed need, and hopefully be a facility that not only provides low barrier shelter type of product, but also the services that need to go along with serving the community who's experiencing homelessness, kind of a one-stop shop, if you will, and also possibly combining a day shelter, sort of all in one facility. That is aspirational right now, but that's kind of what we're aiming for. But the HIAC Shelter Subcommittee did make the long-term recommendation that we explore the low barrier shelter recommendation from the National Alliance to End Homelessness. So that'll be the next step, and we'll form that task force and get to work and hopefully have something before you all in time for next year, so that we're not looking again next year at this emergency funding need. But we'll have to move quickly if that's going to be possible. I hope that kind of rounds it out. And as the county did pass this. They've got county staff now and city staff. Emily Ball and team are working on this, so very well coordinated.
Thank you, Esther. I really appreciate you going through all that. And I hope that's the level of discussion and sharing we can repeat on Tuesday, because, this is a big step. And I'm not sure that, maybe if those folks that are really closely working on it are really hyper aware, but I don't think a lot of the community is. And I know there's a lot of concern around this community issue in general. So thank you for taking the time to explain all that. Please do it again on Tuesday if you can. And I think being able to communicate these efforts is crucial. And thank you to everybody who's worked on this thus far.
Councilmember Mosley.
Again, another tangential question relating to funding sources. And I guess it's for Brad. Have we received the opioid settlement litigation allocation? And if we have not, any idea when we could receive it? And then the second part, assuming we haven't received it and we're going to receive it down the road, is it possible that those funds be, swapped out at a later date for utilization on this project?
So
In other words, have the funds today, could we have used that pot of funding for this particular project? And if we get it subsequently, could we utilize those funds? I'm just trying to think of ways to keep the ARPA balance up.
Well, let me see if I can answer that first question first and perhaps complicate this even further. I don't believe we've received all of the opioid funding for the second settlement yet. There has actually been some complications on that at the national level. We've recently had a judge that has essentially upended the proposed settlement to a certain degree. Everyone is still working to try to get that resolved. Everyone is still trying to move forward, but there may be a bit of a delay in receiving some of those funds. So we will keep you posted, but there at this point are some questions regarding what the timeline will eventually look like.
But I thought that they kind of retracted and most of the money was going to go to the county in the end, and we were going to get like a tiny bit. So if this is $750,000, I don't even think it totaled that over the 10 years.
It's not a tremendous amount coming directly to the city. Many of the municipalities around the state are agreeing to essentially divert their funds to the county to combine with their resources so that they can have a targeted response. It is a much lower amount. I don't have the numbers immediately in front of me, but it is a considerably lower amount than what the county receives, even slightly lower than what we received during the initial settlement funds about a year and a half or so ago. But again, there's still some flux going on right now with the final settlement approval.
So my second part was, would this have been a permissible purpose for usage?
I think it's possible. We might have to examine that. Again, without the settlement being completely finalized, some of those details are also still up in the air about what the viable uses are. But I believe it probably could have qualified under the previous settlement parameters.
Because what I'm thinking about is not for this particular allocation, but for next year or something, if that's available.
Yeah, without knowing all the final details, I can't say with certainty, but my initial reaction is probably so.
Although, as this becomes a reality one day, it would be interesting to explore whether or not we should just give our money to the county to add to what they're doing, or if it really makes sense for us to hold on to the funds ourselves. But I mean, obviously, we're apparently a ways out from having that discussion. So.
But it's an important point, because when these days come, like, this is a short-term solution, 15 months. But when we get to the longer-term solution, there's going to be a lot of financial ask. And I just really can't say it early enough that I feel like, because of the way that some of this money is coming down the line to the county, I feel like the majority of these longer-term sheltering needs are going to fall on the shoulders of the county. And we kind of got to figure out what our role is, at least from my perspective. Like, I feel like we play a small role. We're a piece of the table, but we're not the main funding body. We're not the main organizing body.
I totally agree with you. And I think that when we talk about a long-term solution, we are not talking about a facility, kind of a multi-purpose facility that is owned and operated by the city of Asheville. Ideally, it is like a lot of these other services, a separate entity. And that there are other sources of funds that make more sense than the way cities are structured in North Carolina than for our city to have to be burdened with. We don't have the budget to handle it. But we are getting positive indications from groups like Dogwood, who would be interested in helping fund the capital needed to acquire a multi-purpose facility. Again, I'm thinking of this terms as my nature, multi-purpose facility, but So I think I hear you loud and clear, Sage, and I think that is something that we'll be working on as this task force moves through this process of kind of a more permanent solution. And also, with HIAC in terms of their guidance and recommendations, and following through with the recommendations of the National Institute of Health.
Okay, I think we have concluded our review of the agenda.
Ms. Ronnie, did you raise your hand? Or did you take it down?
Yeah, I have several more questions and clarifying points that I think we can make throughout the process, but I'll just leave this seed in the ground, is that I agree that we should take our small sum and move it into the county and collaborate instead of expending part of our funds in the bureaucracy and the process that happens when we attempt to allocate a small fund. I think it could go farther if we collaborate.
Okay, I'm going to move us back to our agenda, and next we have council committee. So that's going to be a combination of myself, Rachel, and Deborah. And actually, I'm going to go first. We have Planning and Economic Development Committee scheduled for September 11th at 4 p.m. We have 2 items on that, one of which will come to full council, I think, in October. The first is we're going to provide an update to PED on our outdoor dining ordinance update. That's an ordinance and fees. And what that really does is, council remembers, during COVID, we made accommodations to allow businesses to expand and make greater use of the sidewalk, parking lots, parking spaces as a kind of a way to kind of manage some of the COVID impacts at that time. Very popular program amongst a lot of our business community, particularly our restaurants who seem to take advantage of that opportunity. What this does is we'll make that now a permanent program. So PED is going to talk about some of the structural changes to the ordinance, as well as consider some of the fee recommendations associated with that. And again, provided that gets a positive recommendation from PED, it will come to full council in October. And of course, we'd like to open that program up and have it in place. So next year, when it warms up again, businesses will have a way to participate in our outdoor dining and streetery programs. The other item for PED is the second meeting on the work plan. So we are going to try as a committee to finalize PED's work plan for FY24. So again, looking forward to that discussion. And that concludes the PED agenda for September. If there are no questions on that, I am, Deborah, going to turn it over to you for policy, finance, and human resources.
Thank you, Ben. We meet on September the 12th at 11 o'clock, and I need to apologize to the mayor because our meeting to review and have an overview and discussion of the agenda items is later on today. And usually we like to have these before it comes to full council for the agenda briefing. So Mayor, I apologize. We just couldn't get it scheduled ahead of time. But we have a number of items on the agenda. I believe there are 5. None of them are for action. The first business item is the water cost of service study. It'll be a presentation and update. You may recall during the budget discussion, we were directed by council to continue this study and assessment before any types of adjustments possibly would be made to our ratepayers in the categories of residential, commercial, manufacturing, wholesale, and et cetera. We will be coming to you all, giving you again an update on where we are in terms of that study and discuss potential adjustments or recalibration of the rates. Ms. Roney?
Yeah, if I could just ask a clarifying question, just because I think that sometimes when we move through our processes, the language changes and it can be confusing for the public. So we've previously called this the rate study, right?
Yes.
Okay. So as we're discussing the rate study, which we're now calling the cost of service study, could we anticipate seeing some options of choices to make recommendations, or will there be one staff recommendation?
There will be both. Staff recommendations and options.
Thank you.
The next item would be the initial conversation on the fiscal 2025 capital improvement program process and an introduction to the possibility of a 2024 GO bond. And staff will be updating the committee on work that we have done, provide you with the calendar in terms of the path forward, and hopefully look forward to a real robust conversation around that item. Item number 4 is the fiscal year 2023 year-end audit. That is just an update on where we are. It's similar to the budget process. We have fairly detailed schedules and requirements that we have to meet. And again, that will simply be an update. And then our last kind of business item would be the work plan development. And I believe this would be the first time that we come to this particular committee with a discussion of our work plan items. And that will be presented by Ms. Jamie Matthews, who's again going to give us an update and a schedule of items coming to this committee. We will not be looking at this for an entire fiscal year in terms of the committee work plan. I believe to date, we kind of gave some kind of hard deadlines up to December, and then maybe general things that'll be coming to you for the rest of the year until we can really firm up the items to come to the committee. So that will conclude our meeting. It's a fairly dense, from a subject matter perspective, number of items that are on this committee's agenda. Hope we can get to it. And then I think Boards and Commissions Committee has been canceled, and now Rachel, I believe it's Housing and Community Development.
Yeah.
Unless there's any questions. Okay.
Sorry, I do have one question on the Policy and Finance HR Committee agenda document that's attached. It says the meeting starts at 11, but in our agenda briefing, it says it starts at 10. And we do have a HIAC meeting that morning that got rescheduled to Tuesday. So I wasn't sure if there's a reason why.
It looks like it's 10. You're right. The item on the agenda packet is inaccurate.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so moving to September 19th. September 19th, we have our Housing and Community Development Committee scheduled to meet that morning, and then that afternoon, the Equity and Engagement Committee is meeting. So Council Members Smith and Turner, we're going to be spending several quality hours together on the 19th. Those agendas are pretty robust, so I'm going to go through them briefly now. Housing and Community Development, first item on there is an update from Emily Ball on our Continuum of Care Consolidated Funding applications to HUD. This is the funding we receive every year. This includes funding for our Homeless Management Information System grant, as well as other grant programming funding that supports the Continuum of Care. Emily's also, as a part of the HCD meeting, going to provide an update on Code Purple. As the mayor mentioned, Code Purple will continue and be augmented potentially by the short-term shelter funding solution identified by the shelter work group. And the city and county annually support Code Purple at a level of $50,000 per year from each agency. Also on the agenda for HCD on the 19th is an amendment to the HUD Consolidated Plan. The intent of this action is to allow Helpmate to use HUD funds outside of the city limits. They're currently constrained to use those HUD dollars within the city limits as they are trying to find housing for victims of domestic violence. It's challenging to identify that housing within the city limits. And so they are requesting an expansion of that border to be anywhere within the county, just so that that can expand options for finding affordable housing for their clients. Next will be an update from Sasha Bertunsky on the Affordable Housing Plan. She has, since the contract was approved with Enterprise, who is our vendor for the Affordable Housing Plan update, Sasha has been working with them on an implementation plan, working with them on the different engagement strategies that we will have as we were doing the targeted policy review. And so Sasha is going to give a specific update on the process that we're going to go through as that Affordable Housing Plan is being reviewed. And then last on the agenda for HCD is the HCD annual work plan review. Then, Councilmember Turner.
Just real quick, so the work plan review, recently there was kind of some actions council wrote in about wanting to see get onto a work plan. Is this one we'll discuss it? Is that the?
We will be discussing some of the feedback we received. We're also going to prepare a memo that's going to be included in your follow-up materials that you should get on Monday or Tuesday of next week. That's going to include specific responses to the email that you submitted with potential plan items.
Awesome, thank you.
Sure thing. So then in the afternoon, the Equity and Engagement Committee is meeting. We will have our standing update from our Equity and Inclusion Director, Brenda Mills, recapping the September 18th Community Reparations Commission meeting and also providing an update on the Stop the Harm audit. Then you'll receive a very brief update from our CAPE Director, Dawa Hitch, on the Festival of Neighborhoods, which we encourage all City Council members to attend. That's going to occur from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. on Saturday, September 30th at Martin Luther King Jr. Park. Admission is free, so please tell your neighbors and friends and encourage them to participate in that event. Next on the agenda is we'll get an update from Rachel Taylor and Promise Bozeman on our Kayla program. And last on the agenda is Rachel Taylor will provide updates on the strategic partnership grant process. It's going to be kind of a two-part presentation. The first part is going to be recommendations and seeking feedback on how to use the $50,400 remaining from our initial strategic partnership grant pilot that occurred last summer, and then getting feedback from the committee on potential process revisions and a revised timeline for our next round of funding for that grant program. And that is what we have for HCD and the Equity and Engagement Committee.
Okay, if there's no additional questions on council committees, I will move to review of the 8-week agenda. I have a lot to cover on this. There's a lot happening in the next few months. So just want to start with going through some of the work sessions that are upcoming. You'll notice that some of this scheduling is also part of the consent agenda in terms of getting these dates on the council calendar. But I want to start with Thomas Wolfe Auditorium Work Session. We have that scheduled for September 26th at 3 p.m. Staff under Chris Corl's leadership is going to offer to council optional tours of the facility. So as part of the council follow-up materials, we are going to provide council with a sign-up sheet and a number of dates and times where you can sign up to go through a tour of the facility prior to the work session. So hopefully council will take advantage of that opportunity. Go ahead, Councilwoman Ullman.
Just highly recommend to spend some time taking a look at it if you haven't been to an event there in a long time. Seeing them behind the stage is really valuable. I'm our liaison to the Civic Center Commission, and the Civic Center Commission, we met on Monday or Tuesday of this week, and they really recommend that we all see it hands-on to just understand the state of play in the facility. So hopefully folks can make it.
Yes, thank you, Councilman Ullman. And again, be on the lookout for the form to sign up for one of those tours. Moving on October 10th, 2023 at 3:30 p.m., you'll have a work session on the comprehensive facilities study. As I'm sure council remembers, Walter Ear, the project manager, has been before you several times over the past months to give updates as part of the city manager's report. So we have a final study in place, a final document. So again, this will be a work session to really review that in detail with council. It's a lot of information. So in the spirit of that, we'll also have a tentative second work session to review that study on November 14th, 2023. So again, just be on the lookout for that information. And then another item that we spent some time talking about preliminarily is our CIP, which ultimately will result hopefully into an initial GEO bond initiative. We have a work session scheduled tentatively in December of 2023 to begin discussing that information. And as Deborah mentioned, we're going to have some preliminary updates shared with policy and finance at your September meeting. That is our upcoming work session schedule. Again, a lot of kind of robust information to be shared with council. Last thing that I'm going to share off the 8-week agenda is I'm going to bring your attention to October 10th. That meeting will include a resolution reaffirming the city's commitment to multimodal transportation. And we're going to ask council to authorize staff to continue with a vendor selection process for the College Patton bike lane project. We will have a memo forthcoming that will be provided prior to the next agenda briefing that will give more details on that resolution and kind of where things are at with multimodal transportation.
Hey Ben, can I add add a little color to that? So yep. Council, we don't have currently the process for implementing all of the multimodal transportation projects is such that there's community outreach, community input, and staff works with the community as they work through the plans in our master plans. And then when it comes back to council, or when it comes to council, is for a budget amendment to approve the contract. But obviously, there's a lot of space between when this council adopted the multimodal master plan or the Greenways master plan or whatever plan it is that calls for this project and the moment where we actually vote for the funding. So in this case, since there's a lot of community interest and discussion, as you saw at our last council meeting, after talking with staff, they made the suggestion that we put this on as a resolution, much like we did for Merriman Avenue and the Charlotte Street Road Diet, so that there's an opportunity for this to be on the agenda under new business. And the community can come and speak at council, and then council will vote on the resolution. And if the resolution has support for the which would support the project, then staff will put it out to bid, and the contract will come back to us on our consent agenda for a vote. So just kind of throwing that at you so that you're flagging this process piece. This would be in the alternative to also having a work session, which there didn't seem to be a lot of enthusiasm for. We kind of did talk about this, I think, for almost an hour at our last council meeting. So any questions about that process piece of it? This was kind of a brainstorming, and I spoke with Rachel, and this was staff's suggestion for how to kind of allow for an opportunity for this to be on our agenda so we could receive public comment and vote on it before it went out to bid. It will delay it a couple of months, I think, because of the two-step process. Everybody good on the process piece of it?
What were I missed the timing. What was the timing again for the process for the first thing this month?
It would be October 10th would be when the resolution would take place. And from there, pending approval of the resolution, staff would proceed with the solicitation and vendor selection, which then ultimately City Council would have to approve before we entered into a contract with the selected vendor.
Thank you.
I know I'm one of the folks that is kind of on the fence and trying to pick the direction. So I submitted some questions, and other council members also had some questions around all modes and complete streets and stuff. So I expect we'll have that back in a reasonable time for some of us to evaluate before.
Yeah, as Ben mentioned, we're working on consolidating all of that information into a memo, and we plan on having that memo ready to distribute with the next agenda briefing packet that you'll receive in about 2 weeks. Okay. We're also doing some targeted outreach, and we're potentially going to have a presentation and an update on the project to the Downtown Commission at their September meeting, just so that we can make sure that the business community is aware of our next steps in the process, because we have received several emails asking when the work session was going to be or clarifying what those next steps would be.
That's great. One other connection for everybody to be aware of, this other thing that is coming concurrently is the streetery program we just mentioned earlier in this meeting. And so one of the concerns I keep hearing about the bike lanes is the reduction of parking spaces. So I still haven't seen an actual document that shows which parking spaces are being lost. I think I put in a request for some more images, but the streetery program overlaps with this, because some of the streeteries were being asked to approve and make permanent also detract parking from these same streets. So I just want everybody to make that connection as we start to review both.
And also I would like to say that when we look at this, the resolution, will that look at the whole, actually the agenda? I mean, let's say, how would I say it? Does it look at the whole project as a whole, holistically, and not just piecemeal, like, certain corridors? How is that resolution? How is that going to work?
Like Biltmore Avenue too?
Huh?
Do you mean like Biltmore Avenue too, like other
places?
Yeah,
I was just wondering what are we looking at exactly? Are we looking at the whole overall process, or are we just looking at piecemeal when we start talking about the
You're talking about the vote that's coming up in October?
Yes.
Sandra, so that would be a resolution just tied to this specific project, so the Patton College project.
That's what I was, yes.
So along the same lines that we did Merriman and we did Charlotte, we had opportunities for council to vote just on that, just on that project. We're not opening it up to others.
Yeah, that was one of my concerns, because I sort of think unless we give an overview of what we're actually looking at from a broader perspective, people can actually understand the impact. And the only reason I say that was Sage brought up the situation with the parking, because basically we need to look at it holistically and the impact it will have to the whole downtown area. And I think that's important. So I was just wondering if that may be an option.
It sounds to me like what you're talking about is making sure that the presentation includes sort of the bigger picture, the broader context.
Exactly.
And a good overview of the project. And I think that, Rachel, if you can confirm, I think that's the plan, right?
It is. It's we'll include a more detailed map that lists the entire plans for the bicycle network, particularly in and around the central business district, clarify what is specified in previously approved city council plans, and then talk more specifically about the scope of the project. And Councilmember Turner, your request regarding a specific map showing the parking spaces that will be removed will be included as an attachment to that memo that will be distributed prior to your next agenda briefing.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Rachel.
And, I would say, I have had an opportunity to meet with staff, and any of you can ask for this meeting. I know it takes time, but to sit down and put the whole plan on a table and go through all the minutia and every parking space and every lane and every bit of the bike lane project. I mean, you can do that if you'd like to, especially if you're struggling to try to answer constituent questions. So if that's going to be helpful to you, let staff know and they'll make an opportunity to do that. I did that because I have now had another meeting with a lot of the downtown business owners that we've heard from on council, where we all sat around a table with staff and looked at every detail of the plan with those business owners and tenants, so that they could ask all of their questions and look through every piece of the plan, and also how staff has responded to their concerns about loading zones, and other issues. There will be a total of 17 spaces removed. None of them are handicap spaces. And so, those kinds of details are, staff is obviously going to make it available, but I just wanted you to know that ahead of time, if you wanted to have that kind of incredibly detailed meeting. And again, I just did that because I needed to have that information as I met with the business owners who requested a meeting, and then also with the Biltmore company who requested a meeting with me as well. And I wanted to be very knowledgeable about what I was talking about when they asked their questions.
And one reason too, it's like Ben was talking about, as far as utilizing the street space and sidewalk space for vendor use of whatever. So we need to take that in consideration too when we talk about basically expanding on these lanes, because how does that impact how many businesses can actually take advantage of these, the street projects that we're looking at? Would that not impact it also?
Just for context too, I'll share that I'm really hearing from a small group of folks that are really just adamantly opposed to the bike lanes and their impact. But I'm hearing from a large group of folks in downtown that, just the timing of everything is more their concern, that there's a lot going on in downtown and a lot of need downtown, and that the timing of this bike lane just doesn't seem as important. So just so we know, it's not, the feedback I'm hearing isn't just, should it be space there and this space here? It's really like, is this really what we're worried about right now? So just for information, I'm continually meeting with businesses right now. I'm talking with a business or more every single day and kind of conjuring up, like, what is it? If we're saying that, downtown has all these needs, what are those needs right now? And so that we can keep a whole grander perspective, especially for folks like me that feel like there's a lot of pressure to push this bike lane through, and there's a lot of other concerns. And
that's so true. And I can agree with you, Sage, because I've spoken to a lot of the business people that were basically felt that their business, I spoke to a few restaurant owners who said their business has been like 25 to 35% less that they're losing. And the impact. So we're looking at taking on all these other, dealing with issues, and then taking on all this particular issue, which basically the businesses are saying will impact their business, where their businesses have not recovered from the pandemic and they're still struggling. And one particular business owner who owns a couple of restaurants and said that he actually expects that we're going to see more possible businesses closing downtown. So I think in light of all those different issues that we're dealing with, like Sage said, it's not that we're so opposed, but I think we need to look at the holistic approach to the whole impact that it can have on the city and the community as a whole.
I think it's also important not to conflate our economic and safety concerns with bike lanes, because we run 20 different departments, and just because we have a great need in downtown doesn't mean we stop our garbage collection service. We run a transportation service and a multimodal program. We've been doing planning for over a decade for these outcomes. I am sensitive to how hard it is for downtown businesses right now, but we run a complex organization with lots of different functions. And
that's true. Becky, I can understand that, but look at this part. I just want to see if someone could sort of lay out to me the actual benefits to moving forward on the bike lanes at this particular time, then maybe I could be more amenable, because I can't really see the benefits outweighing the needs of the community right now.
Sandra,
I mean,
maybe you and I
you're
can
having-
talk a little, because I would love to just even flush out, what are some of the benefits of a lot of effort in downtown right now, not just bike lanes, because I want to get us across the line to where we have these connecting veins, whatever you guys call them. Sorry, I'm not the biker, but I want to get us there, but I'm feeling like I got to understand the broader approach to what's happening in downtown right now. And I'm appreciative of the delay on staff's behalf. I appreciate it, because I am doing my homework to figure out if we can come up with some just suggestions and ideas to say, if we want to look at downtown on the whole and recognize it needs improvements to transportation, it needs improvements to its street areas program. We're doing little things, but are we looking at it the whole and other things that we could be doing? And maybe we can continue to brainstorm, Sandra, and it will get us closer to October and this pressing one piece of it.
I'd love to be part of that conversation too. I share those concerns. I think that we can hold multiple goals at the same time.
Staff, thank you for indulging us in our conversation about that. And thanks, Council, for talking about the process piece of this. So it sounds like we're okay with the process. Have questions as we move towards that October meeting about this project, and Brad's going to hurry scurry and figure out how to make it possible to use every mode of transportation downtown and in a bike lane between now and then. Thank you, Brad. So, okay, good, thanks.
Ben, are you about ready to wrap up? I just wanted to.
I am done, Deborah, so I'll turn it over to you to conclude.
Okay, I just wanted to quickly remind council of the 9/11 ceremony on Monday in front of the Muni building at 8:30. Usually it doesn't last that long, maybe about 30 to 40 minutes. Just a reminder. And Mayor, council members, if there aren't any other questions, issues, or concerns, we will conclude this agenda briefing. We will be having information sent out to you, hopefully close of business on Monday or as early as possible on Tuesday, following up on questions that have been asked at this meeting and previously through emails and various other means.
Thank you.
We appreciate you. See you on Tuesday. Bye-bye.